Inviting me, first of all. So I must admit that tourism isn't exactly my domain where I specifically work, but I have a paper I am fond of, and I'll explain why I'm fond of now in a few words. That is some way concerned with tourism and what digital systems represent for tourism and cultural institutions. So let's see. Oh, okay. So I can just click, right? Okay, there they are. Good. So I will start explaining where this paper comes from. So there is a link between this place. I don't know if anyone of you recognize this place. It's in Stockholm. The name of this place is Fotografiska Museum. And the day I went there with my wife, we found that it really connected us with this other picture that we took during our honeymoon while we were on a safari. And that really made me, so as it happens, sometimes you take a trip and without really thinking about it, but using systems like TripAdvisor, I understood that probably there was something missing, because if I looked at TripAdvisor and if I keep looking at these type of systems, okay. But, okay, if you look at digital systems the way they are, what happens is that even if digital systems are very powerful and can really convey a lot of information about a location, we really exploit them to one point, okay? So why did I actually make this connection at the time, and why were we so excited when we went to this museum? Because actually, and then I'll explain you also why the Tempio Malatestiano fits in all this process. What happened that day is that we saw this picture. And this picture is it's a famous picture by this photographer, Nick Brandt. It's a very expensive picture, actually. But that day, we saw this picture, and in Stockholm, 1 year later, our honeymoon, we were really, in Stockholm, we were really like sent back to our safari in Africa. So it was one of the most exciting events of that trip for us. So this, with time, helped me ask some questions, and I think that these are questions that are asked by many researchers in the research community. So, are the digital systems that we're using for rating actually conveying an additional amount of information as they could, or are they just mimicking what we already do with books, reviews, etc., etc.? And this is the reason why I propose a few of my colleagues that are here in the I have evidently some problems with this. Okay, so why ask a few colleagues, why don't we try a simple experiment? We take a landmark here in Rimini, there is the Tempio Malatestiano, and we try augmenting just a little bit. So not just reviews, we try introducing additional variables in there that may give us some further feedback about the location, about that place. And so trying to contextualize a little more with what I've been doing instead for research in a wider sense. So I've been working for some time on social media analysis, and this is why I took this side step in trying to understand also what social media mean in thinking about the representation of a touristic attraction. But social media analysis relies mostly on reviews, on a certain amount of keywords that are inserted in those reviews, and they tend to make us take decisions. So what happens is that you go to a new place that you don't know, and you just visit the first 10 places that are listed. And very often, I would make that guess, more often than less, what happens is that the places that you're suggested to go and visit are actually the same. You could find in the same or more or less the same order on a tourist book. So again, the question, but this is a question for a computer scientist, not the question for a computer scientist who's interested in interfaces, is, are we extending the power of these systems to the point where we can actually convey more information than what is simply a picture or a review, so some text regarding the place. My intuition here is that it is no, that interfaces still have to be developed to really gain and grasp what's the potential, and really create those connections that possibly are there. And this, so this is actually comes from another paper I published lately, more recently, but again, it goes in the same direction, because what's happening is that computer systems are really moving from cognitive models to perception models. We think of computer systems as, and traditionally they are bound to the office, but what's happening is that we're interpreting the reality that's around us based on digital systems. And we go to restaurants, we visit landmarks and so on, based on digital systems. So the point is that we're in this, at the middle, we have these two models. On one side we have computer systems, and we are used to computer systems that sense and give a measure, so are based on metrics of something. But this boundary is moving on and on. So what's happening is that we are relying on computer system to gain instead a perception. So we have computer systems that profile us, that tell us new things concerning information that is not so easily measurable, at least not in the classic engineering and sensing way. So this is actually an interesting fact, but clearly means also, so with the development of AI, clearly means also we possibly will have interfaces that will also be conveying such type of information. So, getting back to the paper I was mentioning, what happened is that here, so I will say a few more words about what I'm doing these days and how it concerns this line of research and why I'm interested in human-centric computing in the sense of how you can actually use digital systems as systems that let you perceive. Okay, so from the perception, adopting perception models. But here the evaluation I tried with really a few students was, well, what happened if instead of just collecting reviews and photos, I also let people suggest a movie title or a song title, no? To tag that location. So would it actually give me something more compared to just reviews and photos? And so I carried out this little experiment comparing, you see a tag cloud here from the surveys. There were not many, around 20 surveys with students. And there is some little difference compared to what you actually get from TripAdvisor comments, but more or less we are on the same line considering the Tempio Malatestiano. But what really interested me, and here I don't really have answers, it's more questions than answers actually. I think this paper is more about questions than answers, I really enjoyed reading the movie titles and the song titles that were suggested. In some cases you can expect them, I don't know, Sister Act, Amarcord, okay, but I really have no clue why Mr. and Mrs. Smith. And those are actually the points that as in my case, when I was in Stockholm, in a place that's a completely different scenario from Ngorongoro in Africa, I still was brought in a completely different place, a big emotional memory that came up to both me and my wife. So this is the approach that was taken at that time was, as I said, a simple approach. And clearly, but the questions, I mean, that this poses are, and I'm sure you're all aware about this, is we live in this algorithmic systems. We live, one of the terms that is used is we conduct algorithmic lives, so it's actually interesting in understand how those algorithms are actually directing us and see if those algorithms just conduct us in average directions and if there are any other paths that can be explored. In this sense, so lately I started a new lab here in Rimini and in Bologna, and I think, for example, and this is really thank you for this invitation because it brings other questions that could actually be brought and maybe answered in better ways using virtual reality and augmented reality technologies, because there is this progressive increase of as I said, computer systems that tend to become perceptive systems. So you actually want to be there, you want to understand the place. For example, virtual tools and telepresence are something that are really exploited in this scenario. We are completing it, but this actually could be a perspective. I wasn't really looking, because it's been a few years now since I published that paper, but could really be a direction to look at, because as I said, I guess there are still many open questions on how digital systems are actually used in providing certain type of experiences. Thank you very much.
So good morning. Many thanks to the authors of this paper. I like it very much because it is very interesting, in my opinion, the research question, the issue on the basis of this paper. And the issue is that we have every day a lot of people visiting all over the world, many fantastic places. And the most of the time they decide where to go, what to visit, depending on the number of likes on social media, the star rating of travel websites, and the review provided by people, so the user-generated content. So user-generated content is very important, but here it seems we have a paradox, an evident paradox. And the paradox is we have a lot of information, but much information actually produces flattening of choices, so it reduces the choices of people visiting locations, okay? And I totally agree with you that it would be very useful to identify new ways of creating connections, stronger connections between given locations, for example, the Tempio Malacristiano, and people who review location on websites and so on. Anyway, so the main problems which this paper highlights seems to be the incorrect ways to visualize the information, the great information, the huge information provided by a lot of people, the ineffective synthesis of great amount of data, the probably incorrect evaluation methodologies, and the scarce correspondence between reviewers and tourists. This work compares the information on TripAdvisor with the custom survey concerning the historical place we know very well, the Tempio Malacristiano. So, following my comments, questions to the authors, the first one is, I know yours are preliminary results, but I think that 18 is a very low number for the number of the interview of surveys, and it is very low to draw conclusions. Okay, I suppose you collect all the 18 answers in the same day, or very close to, if I remember correctly, the 1st of June 2015. Okay. In my humble opinion, tourists could be different, very different, in different days and periods. So, for example, we could have in a morning of April students during educational school trips, or in October, in September, pensioners during the morning, during the academic or school years. Okay, and are you sure that your results are valid for a lot of people and a lot of number of days, periods during the year? You wrote respondents are 18 volunteers, I quote, in the 20 to 50 years of age range. But how many are 20? How many are 30? How many are 40? Because I think it could be very, very important. You wrote some respondents, I quote, answered routine and passing by because they simply work or study in the area. They see the Tempio Malacristiano every day and have therefore developed a routine view of it. Okay? But I suppose they are not the typical TripAdvisor reviewer. Okay? So my question for you is, does it make sense to insert them in the study? Because probably the two opinions are very, very different. Okay? Now I have a question for the methodology. How did you identify the categories in which you inserted the keywords provided by people? So is it on the basis of personal judgment? Did you insert the words into categories because they belong to different lexicons shared by scholars, or did you interview colleagues to understand where to put exactly the words? Okay. And at the end, I totally agree with you that using alternative, additional ways, so for example, music, for example, movies, could be very, very important. But, and this is the way to come back to my first comment, I suppose that the preference of people about music and about movies depends on the age, depends on the profile of people you are interviewing. So what is the effect you, in my opinion, need definitely more data. Anyway, I thank you very much. It is a good paper. Thank you.